The focus today, when Holly and I were working on this last year, and it was really Holly's idea at the beginning, and I just sort of rode on her coattails. The idea was, there's three things that are, either always take a lot of oxygen in the room, or just because of changes in the landscape, changes in the technology, ecosystem, are taking a lot of oxygen at the moment. And those three things are the rise of Gen Z and Alpha in the workplace, adding to the large breadth of generational representation we have right now. Second silo number two being AI. Funny, lots of conversation going on around that topic. And silo number three, of course, always a conversation, but especially a lot the last few years, corporate governance. You can find a lot of panels, a lot of conversations, a lot of writing on these three things, but you don't really run into a lot where they are discussed together and where we really look at that Venn diagram of how all three overlap and what is there to uncover as a director and a senior executive in that overlap. And what can we discover when we really look at those three things holistically together? Instead of, and of course, it's good to look at them in their independent silos, but we're going to focus on that Venn diagram today. So with that, we're going to get rolling. And I'm actually going to start, Shubi, I'm going to start with you. And I think the way we'd like to kick it off today is, I already alluded to the fact that we're all talking about AI. Let's go on and put the assertion out there that it's not optional. It is absolutely something that every company and every board need to deal with and interact with to some degree. We know that it has some ethical and moral concerns. We also have a couple of generations in the workforce, primarily Millennials, Z, and Alpha upcoming, who are very vocal and very focused on ethical and moral issues. How do you think about the implications of that combination right now in the landscape?
When we think about our millennials, and especially the younger millennials and the Gen Z, it's really barbelled because on one side, they are truly digital natives and they're used to being on all these various platforms and sharing information. And they recognize that it extracts their data, but they're very comfortable in that space, right? And if you sort of bring that mindset into the work and you think about now AI and for a second, let's just assume that all this unstructured data has been brought together. And now we're thinking just focusing on data and the ethical implications of that. This is where I think we find the differences emerge, right? Because you have this younger generation that has sort of grown up with that mindset of, oh, how should I be thinking of data? Because I personally been okay with it. So that's one side of the barbell. But the other side of that barbell is the same youngsters, so they're very focused, right? I mean, maybe don't know whether ESG is a good word today or not, but setting that aside, they are much more ethically aware and they do care about the consequences of what happens to the consumer base or to the employees or to the shareholders. So you really, so if you think of it like as a classic pyramid, what you're seeing now in the workplace is this sort of barbelled population who also, if you think of it from that perspective, they're coming in, they're learning about, their processes, their systems, their teams in that organization. Then you have sort of the layer in between, which is the middle management who understands what it means to run teams and be able to connect the dots. And then you have the board and senior leaders who have that financial acumen, the strategic acumen, the business acumen, but the digital acumen might be very different than the acumen at the more Gen Z and the younger millennial population. So it's a horizontal issue and it's also a vertical issue. As you were saying earlier, like that Venn diagram, in bringing these generations together, but to really focus on this the ethical implications, but it really starts out with just getting everybody on the same page, because I think there's such a broad spectrum across these generations and how each one of them thinks about the ethical values of that data. So that's where I think the tone has to start at the top in terms of where the guardrails are, what's going to be acceptable, how are we going to protect the data, etc. But and communicating that, and how does that then intersect with your code of conduct that you have in the organization? So all of that has to sort of get pulled together so that it's very consistent, and that's a big piece of work, actually.
Yeah, so that's the takeaway for today. That's enough to be going on with. Have a great rest of your day. And there is, as we were thinking about what's evolved since the first time we did this panel, one thing we've actually had the chance as well over the last months to start to see what's worked and what hasn't for companies. And there's a case study that I ran across a month or two ago of a company where, in order to deal with some of these tensions that you mentioned, these polarities that we have to manage, it was a catering company. And as you can imagine, their business was really upended in both good and bad ways during COVID. And with the advent of improved machine learning AI capabilities, this catering company started to experiment and roll out the use of AI to better plan their food supply, their customer interactions, their planning, et cetera, in the metro areas in which they work. The first mistake they made was they brought in a team of 5 experts. They hired away from Amazon and brought them in to do the first pilot in Atlanta of how AI could help. It went okay. The team did a great job. They uncovered some efficiencies, they saved some money, and they also completely alienated the entire workforce in Atlanta, who were absolutely scared to death. So the company, to their credit, listened, talked, thought about the topic, thought about how to balance these polarities and these implications. And in their follow-on cities, they didn't bring in experts and just put them in a closet and say, okay, go do this. They brought in one advisor per city, but then they created working teams in their other metro areas made up not only of existing employees, but employees of different ages to work on the implementation of these ideas in their other metro areas. They saw a much better result, of course.
That's right.
They found the same business savings, but this time they didn't alienate the employee base. Always a bonus.